This is Shelley Kraft coming to you live on SNNLive, and today's program is coming to you live from the Dawson James Security Small Cap Conference in Jupiter, Florida, 2017. I have with me Dr. Scott Powell from VolitionRx. It's a publicly traded company on the NYSE MKT, and the symbol is VNRX. Scott, welcome back to SNNLive.
Thank you, Shelley. It's great to be back and great to see you again. Thank you.
Always good to have you. Let's get started for our audience with an overview of the company, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thanks, Shelley. So VolitionRx, we are a publicly traded company. VNRX is the ticker. We are a cancer diagnostics company. We're developing blood tests to screen for different cancers, with our lead cancer indication being colorectal cancer.
Now, what's the history of the company, and where was the science developed, et cetera?
The science comes out of Europe from a publicly traded company in the UK and also from the University of Bonn in Germany. Our chief scientist years ago married up two disparate lines of research, filed a number of patents around the joint research and technology, and we now have 13 patents granted, including 5 U.S. patents.
So what are some differentiation factors for Volition in comparison to other companies in the same genre?
So the biggest differentiator is our platform. We are a blood-based test, and if you look at colorectal cancer, the issue with colorectal cancer screening is not that we don't have good tests available. We actually have very good screens for colorectal cancer available to us, the colonoscopy and fecal tests. The problem is compliance. People don't comply enough with their screening. Only about 58% of Americans are current with their screening for colorectal cancer, and that's because they don't like the options available to them. They don't like to submit for a colonoscopy or perform a self-administered fecal test. We think by offering a blood-based option, we can really improve that compliance problem, because while a person may refuse or delay doing a colonoscopy or a fecal test because of the invasiveness and or unpleasantness of the test, many of those people would not refuse to do a blood test. So we can really improve this compliance problem, which is plaguing the United States as well as many other countries. And if we could get more people screened and get them screened earlier through a blood-based option, we'd catch a lot more cancers, and a lot more cancers would be caught earlier, and we'd save an awful number of a tremendous amount of lives.
What is the progress and towards FDA approval, if I may ask?
Sure. So we're proceeding on two continents, Europe and the U.S. We are expecting to complete 2 large clinical trials in colorectal cancer in Q1 and Q2 of next year, of 2018. We will simultaneously CE mark our blood test with the running of those 2 trials. We expect to have a CE marked product in Europe by the middle of next year, which will allow us to launch our frontline blood test in Europe in the second half of 2018, again targeting those non-compliant individuals in Europe. Compliance in Europe is about 50%, so about half of Europeans are not getting screened for colorectal cancer because they don't want to perform a fecal test. In the U.S., about 2 months ago, we announced our participation in the largest ever clinical trial in colorectal cancer, a 13,500 patient study being run by the National Cancer Institute, which, as many people know, is the leading cancer research organization in the United States. There's about 2 years left to collect on that 13,500 patient clinical trial. We expect collection to be completed in about 2 years, and as long as our performance is strong, we would expect FDA approval in 2020, 2021.
Reimbursement.
We expect, because we are a low-cost blood test that runs on standard ELISA equipment, we would expect to get reimbursement. There's a precedent for it. There's another company that has an FDA-approved blood test for colorectal cancer. They are getting reimbursed currently. So we fully expect to be able to get reimbursement, because the cost of our blood test is expected to be maybe in the $100 or $200 range, so not a very expensive blood test. And we run on standard ELISA equipment, which is ubiquitous in virtually every lab and hospital.
You know, another thing that's interesting to me is that you can do a blood test every year where they don't even recommend you do a colonoscopy every year, right? It's sometimes 3 to 5 years apart, right? Am I right?
You're absolutely correct, Shelley. a colonoscopy is given is supposed to be performed when a person turns age 50, unless they have a family history or are symptomatic. They'll screen you before age 50. But if you're asymptomatic without a family history, they'll screen you at age 50. If you're clean, that means no polyps and no colorectal cancer. It's 10 years before your next colonoscopy. So what could be done is an interval test. So rather than waiting 10 years for your second colonoscopy, you could go in at age 55 and ask for a volition blood test as an interval test, just to check, just to be certain.
In typical diagnostic blood tests, there's false positives and false negatives. How do you handle that question?
So in our clinical trials, we are demonstrating sensitivity and specificity of around 80 to 90%, which means we're having false negatives or false positives of between 10 and 20%, which for a blood test are fairly low false negatives and false positives. So sensitivity is your false negative. So if you have 85% sensitivity, it means you have 15% false negatives. So you told 15% of the people they didn't have colorectal cancer when they did. And specificity are your false positives. So if you have 90% specificity, that means you have a 10% false positive rate. You told 10% of people who took the test they had colorectal cancer when they indeed did not. By way of comparison, if you look at some of our competition out there, they are between 68% sensitivity and 92, 95% sensitivity, and specificity ranging between 78 and 95. So we are sort of in the middle of that range in terms of false negatives and false positives, but we're still optimizing our panel of biomarkers. We're still improving our tests, so we would hope that our sensitivity and specificity gets even higher than we've currently demonstrated it in our clinical trials.
Scott, many companies that I've interviewed in your area of expertise are generally developing diagnostic tests to monitor therapies in use. How do you answer that for Volition?
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. Good question. That is one of our differentiating factors. At Volition, we are developing frontline tests to screen for various cancers. As I mentioned earlier, our first cancer indication is colorectal cancer, so our blood test is designed to tell a person whether or not they should go for a colonoscopy or not go for a colonoscopy based upon the presence of certain biomarkers in their blood that we have found to be associated with colorectal cancer. A lot of our competition that are developing blood tests for various cancers, as you correctly pointed out, a lot of them are being used more as therapy monitoring. So after a person's already been diagnosed with a particular cancer, they're then given these blood tests to see if that particular treatment or therapy is being effective or if they need to switch to a different treatment or therapy.
Just for my own clarification, these diagnostic blood tests can be conducted in a doctor's office, couldn't they?
Correct. So our blood test has several advantages. One, it's run on standard ELISA equipment, which is ubiquitous in virtually every lab and hospital. It's what many of your commonly run blood tests run on, so we don't need special equipment for our tests to be run. Secondly, our test requires a very small amount of blood, which means it can just be added on to a person's annual battery of blood tests that they have when they go in for their annual physical. So those are some key advantages of our blood test and our technology.
We last spoke to you about a year ago, so in that span of time, do you have any updates for us?
I do. Thanks, Shelley. We've had a lot of progress over the past year since we last spoke. The updates are in Europe. We are moving forward quickly with our clinical trials. We have 2 large clinical trials that we expect to complete in Q1 and Q2 of 2018. We expect to CE mark our frontline blood test for colorectal cancer simultaneously with these colorectal cancer trials, and we would expect to launch our frontline blood test for colorectal cancer in Europe in the second half of next year. Looking at the U.S., we've been granted a couple more patents, and about 2 months ago, we were really excited to announce our participation in what we believe is the largest ever clinical trial in colorectal cancer in the United States. And it's in collaboration with the National Cancer Institute and the University of Michigan. It's a 13,500 patient study. We would expect completion of the blood samples to take about another 2 years, and then our analysis is probably another 3 months, and then we would look to submit that data to the FDA and hopefully have an FDA-approved frontline blood test for colorectal cancer sometime in 2020 or 2021.
What are your growth drivers?
Well, The interesting thing about Volition is that while a lot of people know us as a colorectal cancer diagnostics company, we actually have very strong data in several other cancers, pancreatic, lung, and prostate. So investors should expect us over the course of 18 perhaps to move into our second cancer, which will most likely be pancreatic cancer. We have already 750 patient samples in our laboratory in Belgium. Once we move through these clinical trials in colorectal cancer, we would expect to analyze those samples in pancreatic. So it really is a platform technology, and we'll look to move into other cancers over the coming years. So we're pretty excited both about colorectal and the opportunities in other cancer indications.
Scott, let's get your website out there for more information for our investor audience, if you would.
Sure. Thanks, Shelley. Again, we're VolitionRx Limited, ticker VNRX on the NYSE American Stock Exchange. Website is www.volitionrx.com, VOLITIONRX.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Scott Powell, VolitionRx. It's a publicly traded company, and the symbol is VNRX on the New York Stock Exchange, Amex. I'm Shelley Crafts. This is SNNLive, and we're coming to you live from the Dawson James Securities Small Cap Conference in Jupiter, Florida, 2017. Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shelley. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.